Howdy folks, we're looking at Edge Magazine issue 27, this time released in December 1995, discussing the future of interactive entertainment. And we have a Sega Rally on the cover, made by AM3 within Sega. And this is mostly about the pushing the Saturn to its limit, because Daytona USA wasn't a very good conversion, but there was quite some faith in the Sega Rally conversion. And it's also an article about artificial intelligence. So, Edge on the inside. Here's the opening column, and it's about let's see, what was it about again? Oh yeah, how AI could change games. And they actually talk about Biohazard, aka Resident Evil. What if that game had smart characters? And there's some slack about the interactive movie, how that didn't give real, authentic interactivity, just mainly only some choices. But what if you could actually talk and all the like with characters? Well, we're still kind of waiting for that. Beautiful picture here, but AI. Tom Zito's interviewed. He makes full motion video games, and Soul Edge being previewed. Soul Blade in Europe, I believe. Okay, so the PlayStation 1 has been released in Europe, and it's considered a success. And Wipeout selling better than Ridge Racer. Well, that kind of makes sense, because Wipeout is a very British game. Also kind of Europe with all the techno and stuff, the aesthetic, and I loved this commercial as a kid, the SAPS one, Society Against PlayStation, and there's this funny nerdy like kind of guy with latex gloves, and he warns us of the dangers of playing the PlayStation. So we have to be against that. The Nintendo 64, some talk about that, even though there's no real news. The Virtual Boy's $20 cheaper now because of bad sales. There were a lot of commercials at the time saying, yeah, I don't need a PlayStation or Saturn for Christmas. I'll wait next year for a Nintendo 64. Can you believe that? I don't think that worked at all. Okay, so there's a big jam with a lot of games, mostly racing games. We have another racing game by Sega, Manx TT Superbike, or was that Namco? I should know. Virtua Fighter 2 being shown. Virtual On, I like that game. It's like it's kind of like Cyber Slip, but a lot more options to it. More like a fighting game. Unfortunately, never had a competitive scene for that in Europe. Sky Target, a Model 2 powered flight sim, kind of like Afterburner. And some kind of weird boxing game here. I don't know. They have these one character. They have these blocky heads. I don't know why. More racing games, Dirt Dash, apparently. And here we have Time Crisis, which Edge seems to like more than Virtual Cop 2. Soul Edge, looking fantastic. Would be called Soul Blade on the PlayStation 1. That was a difference. Hey, we have Cevius again. And Capcom showing off what at the time was called Marvel Fighters. That would be Marvel Superheroes. And yeah, a Mega Man game for the arcade. I hardly hear about that game. Okay, so a Taito with Denkrundam, I guess, and Puzzle Bubble 2. And there's talk about Castlevania Symphony of the Night for the first time here. So, saying it's going to be 2D with hand-drawn sprites. So here you have the letters, and a lot of complaints about, Edge is more in favor of the 3DO, or Edge is more in favor of the PlayStation. So that goes on a lot in the early Edge magazines. And somebody wanted to get into the industry. One person talking about how the older games should come back, and that the new generation of gamers would enjoy them, probably even more than the current games. Okay. On to the previews. Starfighter. Now, I'm getting all these 3DO futuristic shooting games mixed up. But Starfighter was fairly good. I think it's going to be reviewed in the next issue. I don't know if this one was the one who's supposed to be the system seller, but yeah, fairly good one. But 3DO had so many of those shooting games. Here's Marathon 2. So the original one was never reviewed by Edge, unfortunately. Now Marathon 2 is the whole series. I believe there were 3 of them. Are always considered like Doom on the Macintosh. That was the idea, and it did look better than Doom in certain regards. So, but now Part 2, Marathon 2, would be released for the PC. That could be interesting, but it wasn't that interesting actually. They were made by Bungie, by the way, who would later on go on to make Halo, and I believe that Halo was originally considered a Mac game, and then a PC game, and then ultimately an Xbox game, but I could be wrong. Here's Soul Edge. I had forgotten that The Rock used an axe in Part 1. Maybe they changed it later. But this game looked fantastic at the time. Very colorful. Mostly very sharp. I like that aspect a lot. It looked so much better than Tekken. And it played fast. It played a lot like Virtua Fighter, but with longer strings. And yeah, this would start, in my opinion, the best series of 3D fighting games. Even though Soul Calibur 5 wasn't that much to my liking. So, Virtua Fighter 2. This time for the Saturn, looking fantastic. That was a very good version of the game, and but it wouldn't save the console, unfortunately. Ridge Racer Revolution, not to be confused with the Ridge Racer 2. Extra cars, extra tracks, better graphics. Didn't make that much of an impact though. There were 4 Ridge Racer games eventually on the PlayStation 1, and I get them all confused. Crusader being looked at by Electronic Arts, and this is a isometric top-down shooting game with more focus on strategy, and it got good reviews, although I've never played it. So we'll see a review next time for that. This is the actor from Wayne's World appearing in a game. The Daedalus Encounter. Don't know if that's a good game though. Total NBA. I believe it's called NBA Shootouts in America. And this was a above average basketball game with good-looking 3D graphics. So that was its main claim to fame, to show off what the PlayStation 1 could do. This series lasted until about 2003, I believe. So it wasn't as good as NBA Live though. Another odd commercial for the 3DO. So, AM3, a cover article. They also make games, like Manx TT Superbike. Yes, indeed, Sega title. And Sega Rally is probably their biggest hit. And there would be a very good conversion for the Saturn. So there's some talk about technical things. And they also have their motorcycle game, this one being made for the arcade. So, subscription page, back issues. So let's see how long the string has been, because this was a pretty good cover. So for 5 issues straight, they had an ugly cover. Okay, Mind Games. I was a bit disappointed with this article. I like to follow the AI possibilities in video games, and maybe it's because it was back in the time. But so there's some talk about all the genres. You know, like chess, of course, is always used for AI. Similar to chess are strategy god games, and they discuss some of the kind of how it goes with sports and action games. RPGs, of course, but we're still waiting on that. I thought what the article had to say on AI was all very kind of obvious, actually. So there's talk, mostly what you get out of this article is how the industry is focused more on graphics and less on AI. And there's a lot of talk with Peter Molyneux, what he thinks. So, yeah, but not that much new to say on it. And now there was an interesting perspective from the mid-90s, what it was like. It is true that you had games like ID in 1986 and other programs that tried to be like beat the Turing test in the early 80s. Because, yeah, you had microcomputers, computers who... yeah, you would type into them, and the AI would try to talk back to you. That was quite a thing back then. But after that, games have predominantly been about movement, and movement is kind of a simple thing, so AI doesn't have to be that advanced. Okay, so let's get back to the games. Loaded being reviewed here. That clown always sticks with me. They used him for the commercials. And it's top-down shooting game, not unlike Doom, but then top-down, so it plays a lot like Gauntlet, and or the Chaos Machine by the Bitmap Brothers, if you remember that game. So it looks good, and Edge gives it an 8, even though they say it's quite a simple game. Blade Force. Oh yeah, this was supposed to be the system saver for the 3DO, and it only gets a 7. And it's again another futuristic looking 3D flight shooting game. And there's just not that much to it actually. Other than it might be the best looking game on the 3DO. But at the same time it's also showing that the 3DO simply doesn't have the power of the PlayStation. Screamer, what's basically the PC's answer to Ridge Racer. And so kind of going for that aesthetic and speed and look. I think it had more cars and tracks than Ridge Racer, but not as original. And a lower frame rate, on Pentiums at least. And, well, there was nothing newer at the time. So this game gets a 7 out of 10. We have Wing Arms, a flight sim shooter game, kind of like Ace Combat for the PlayStation, but this one's for the Saturn. And this game also gets a 5. So, see a lot of similar games on the Saturn and the PlayStation, including kind of boring flight shooter games. Prime Goal EX, another Japanese soccer game, and kind of like Winning 11, it plays smoothly. It also gets a 7. So, yeah, just another good soccer game. Feed Tennis also gets a 7. And this is by the people who made Super Tennis, which was at the time the best tennis game ever made. And this article talks about how the use of polygons hasn't really helped. If anything, it's gotten in the way because the hit detection seems to be a little bit off. So, yeah, they're basically saying play 2D Super Tennis on your Super Nintendo instead of this. But they still give it a 7 because it's still a fairly good tennis game. Boxer's Road. They're very Japanese, and it's part sim, part boxing game. So you can train and give tactics to your boxer, but I believe you can also do the fighting. So it's a bit of a mix, and Edge doesn't like the mix, so they give it a 5 out of 10. Their retro review discusses Wave Exploding Fist. Now, I've never played this game. What we see are images of the Spectrum version, which had very fancy looking backgrounds. A lot of color. And I don't know how well this game plays. It was made after Karate Champ, and also probably after International Karate. So this one was kind of lost in the mix to me. And Edge doesn't talk much about what this game offers. It mostly talks about other fighting games, how they haven't changed that much. And that's typically Edge, growing up on free games for the ZX Spectrum. And for some reason, kind of ignoring all the progress it just made since then. I mean, they talk about Jet Set Willy as if it's still one of the best platforming games. And Night Lore, the same thing. So, a lot more and more ads for working industry. Here's Tom Zito. This was a funny interview. Kind of awkward, actually. So this guy, he makes the full mission video games like Night Trap and Ground Zero Texas, and he was going to release Maximum Surge. And what is Maximum Surge? This game was never released, but the funny thing is you can see a lot of video images of the game in a movie called, get this, Game Over. So if you look up Maximum Surge and Game Over on the internet, you'll find that there's this movie, I believe about half an hour of the movie he actually recycled film from this game, obviously made in the mid-90s, although the movie Game Over, I believe, was released in 2003. And they use an actress who at the time played in Baywatch. I don't remember her name. Yasmin Bleeth, that was it. So it's so 90s. It's horrible. And so they never got the game off the ground, but they could use some of its assets. So this Tom guy, he unconvincingly, he tries to sell why full motion video games are better than other games. And basically his argument boils down to, yeah, the graphics look more realistic, so you're more immersed in the game. And he keeps talking about this football game, quarterback something. Quarterback Attack. And he's like, yeah, with only in my games do you feel as if a 350 pound linebacker's tackled you. I don't know if a linebacker does that, by the way. I'm not that familiar with American football terminology. But you get the idea. Edge, I tell you, half of the questions they ask are rhetorical. Like, but when you're playing a game, you don't really notice the resolution of the enemy. You simply realize that there's an enemy there and you have to kill it. Or, let's continue with, but Maximum Surge isn't a graphic adventure. It's an action game. Surely, in an action game, stealing interactivity is perilously dangerous. I mean, you can really get where the Edge interviewer is coming from, saying, yeah, it's all about the gameplay. It's all about making not only choices, which is the FMV games do give you, but actually acting out these choices in the way you want to do. And this Tom Zito fellow is like, no. It's more important that the player is really in the game, but because due to good graphics. And I kind of like how he says, I never cared about Princess Toadstool because she didn't look realistic. That's kind of what he said. So yeah. Well, I guess he was wrong because his next game would never be released, and the likes of Ground Zero Texas are maligned to this day. So, but nice guy. Thanks for answering all those nasty questions. Q&A. Any interesting questions? Talk about the Jaguar. I forgot the questions already. I don't like this part of the magazine. So, and we are nearing the end. Next month will feature a head-on clash between the Saturn and the PlayStation. So mostly about their marketing. And there's also something about, are video games destroying your mind? Ooh. Yeah, back in the mid-90s, people were afraid that video games would corrupt everybody. And I guess it did a little, but not that badly. So that was Edge Magazine, issue 27. Still Magazine of the Year. And yeah, next time we'll be doing January 1996, so we'll get the Christmas season. And a lot of games reviewed in the next one. So hold on tight for that, and I'll see you then.